Can I say a few things before? Yeah, there's a couple of questions here. We'll come to that. First of all, I want to thank Venerable's Ajahn Santamana for taking over yesterday with all the Zoom and YouTube and all the great support in a very humble and sort of like in the background doing everything, and it just gets done. So it's great support. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank those Venerables for great support for the Bhikkhuni Sangha, and kindness and support and acceptance that you've shown me over in the time that I've known you. It's like different for both of you. And I want to apologize to all of you for not being here yesterday. And thank you for your well wishes as well. Yeah. Okay. So, questions. Yeah. So there was one question left over. Yes. Yesterday.
We sorted those on.
Yeah, I've got 3 here, but I think 2 of them you've already done, and there was one that you wanted me to do. Okay. All right. So. We also have a few questions from Zoom that we will get to today. So 3 questions there. Okay, so this one, wisdom is wisdom, smiley. Yet a predominantly male perspective in wisdom traditions, as in Buddhism, leaves me with this idea. Is there something intrinsically unwise about a female perspective all through societies? Can't be, right? Yeah, I had to think about this one. And I think the Venerable did say a few words about this yesterday. What I got a little bit stuck on is like what's the male and female perspective, and I think that has to do a lot with our ideas of like masculinity and femininity. I'm not sure if that's what the writer of this question means. Masculinity and femininity are things that have changed over the years or over the centuries as well, and in different societies on how we see that. And it has a lot to do with how traditionally we're raised to have certain qualities or to develop certain qualities for certain genders or certain sexes, like for instance the nurturing quality being seen as more feminine, and in a more broader sense you can say it's like, oh, the intellect would be more masculine and the intuition more feminine. But yeah, all these things are ways how we have been conditioned in our lives, which and in Buddhism, all of that is important. It's not, but that we just have for the intellect, or we just have nurturing qualities or something like that. We all have that, and nurturing qualities and care and love and metta and whatever, they're all important, especially in Buddhism. I'm going to have, because we don't really have the discussion here.
No, true. But can I just add it because it's my question?
Oh, okay.
I would just love to reformulate it in a better way. Actually, what I meant and what I didn't get to is that all the text, the Dhamma, has been written down by man, if I'm not wrong. And I'm just finding it, I'm struggling with connecting with the Dhamma, the written Dhamma, as knowing that it has all been written by man and there's no female writer. That's just the thing. So it's a personal thing. It's not something else.
I'm not sure if that's entirely correct. It is true that most of the suttas are actually the suttas, they were recounted orally, for quite a number of centuries before they were actually written down. And that was usually done in groups, so not one person could start to change things. So that was, and most of these suttas are spoken by the Buddha, not all, some are from his disciples. And there's also from several of his disciples, one of them particularly that I like very much, and that's the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina. And basically it's a discussion, a very, very deep discussion between her and her ex-husband, and who is said to be a Sotapanna, and she's said to be enlightened. And it's about like I don't want to go too much into the sutta itself here, but it goes very, very deep, and he keeps on questioning her, and she gives very, very good answers. And in the end, it goes to, like it's usually the case, if like one of the disciples answers, the questioner goes to the Buddha and asks like, well, what do you think of this answer? And the Buddha praises her for being so wise. And is also in one of the other suttas where there's a whole list of the bhikkhunis, is that she's the wisest in there. So yeah, so these suttas are there. There are a whole lot less, of course, for the bhikkhunis. Most of them, like I said, is from the Buddha himself. So that's. But yeah, I don't think it's that black and white, but yeah, I don't know. Is there anything you want to add?
Well, you mentioned the Therigatha and the printout you have down there. Also, the Iti Utaka was recorded by
Iti Utaka,
by a woman.
That's right. Yes, yeah. The Iti Utaka was recorded by. It's actually. A queen who was living in a palace, and she wanted to hear the Buddha's teachings, but she wasn't allowed to leave the palace. So she sent one of her servants to go to the Buddha's teachings and come and relate it back to her. And she became, and all her other people around her, all her the ladies in waiting, or however that's called in English, they became also quite reached very high stages of enlightenment. The Therigatha I find a little bit, it is said to be the verses of the women, but it wasn't actually transmitted through a women's line, so it was written down by men. So there it's a little bit, it's like, well, where do the verses actually come from in the first place? And so it's not entirely sure. But yeah, it is a book that is quite often seen as at least that the voices of the bhikkhunis are recorded in that.
Wouldn't we think that bhikkhunis would have been memorizing those? Is there some of their texts also to transmit with the oral tradition, though? For sure, right? The very inspiring verses. Very good.
They are, yes. Then you'd also ask, well, where is then the prose text of that? I don't know. Yeah, so it's a bit not entirely sure where that came from, but it's most likely the scholars seem to agree that at least when it started to be written down, it was all by men. Also the Therigatha. So that's.
There are some translations down in the paper magazine.
Yes, from Ayasoma, very beautiful translations downstairs on the thing, so with beautiful illustrations. He's made that, yeah, absolutely. So the stories are there. There's just, there are less of them. That's true. But, of course, like this majority is from the Buddha, and the Buddha was a man, so that's, of course, yeah. And Santamana, want to add something?
I think, what you said, very content.
Adam, didn't you tell me something this afternoon about the later traditions?
Oh, we'll just mention that Prajna Paramita, the
Mm.
wisdom sort of archetype, is considered feminine, and that
Mm.
it, gives birth or, creates the Buddha like that. In later Buddhism, you do have, possibly more feminine perspectives on Buddhism or traditions, or especially in like North Indian, later Tantric Buddhism, things like that as well.
But thank you for clarifying that, and otherwise I was going in a very different direction. Is that, yes. Okay, so are these only two?
From yesterday?
No, well, no, there's two others from yesterday, but I thought that you had already dealt with that.
Oh, there were a few unanswered from yesterday, actually.
These are two as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. There's
And,
one on
no,
one on the knowing, one on death. And are there two new ones?
And there's one new one from today.
Card.
so what's the Buddhist notion of death? What happens when we are not in bodies? What do we go? Where do we go during night? During the night, dreaming, and what about previous life memories? So yeah, I suppose the full, I suppose question of death, then and what happens when we are not in bodies, and then where do we go when we are dreaming, and then what about previous life memories? Yeah, it's this death, contemplation of old age, sickness, and death. In one sense, we don't really know what happens after we die at this moment. There's the teaching of rebirth and various different traditions maybe provide different explanations or different theories of what happens when we die, or how rebirth takes place. But in this moment, we don't really know. So, and yet that I feel the contemplation of death, of impermanence, is such an important part of practice. And when we first hear about this, that the uncertainty of life, just one in breath is all we can be certain about, that we can live this long, and then the future, we don't know when we will die. And so when one first hears something like that, one can feel, oh, isn't that depressing to think about why bring those things to mind? And yet I feel it's, if one actually does this or tries this out, then I've found the experience to be the opposite of depressing. It's more that our ordinary tendency can be to just take life for granted, and we just assume, oh, this will just continue forever. So then why it, so the people and also considering death, one's own death, or also people we care about. So then what at least what tends to happen for me is that a recognition of the preciousness of each moment because it is so uncertain, and then that generates a motivation to give more importance to each moment that we have. And also making more of an effort to cultivate kindness, give value to those people we care about, and not, or at least making an effort not to take them for granted. So the more one is able to develop that perception of impermanence, then the value one gives to the present moment tends to increase. And the more clearly we can see the present moment, then there's more potential for awakening. We, because presumably if such a thing as enlightenment exists, then it can't happen in the past. It's not. It can only happen here and now, in the present. So yeah, I suppose that's what comes to mind about death. Then with these ones, I'm not sure. Like what happens when we are not into bodies? Or where do we go when we are dreaming? The previous life memory. Maybe I try the last one first and then see if anything else. I certainly don't have any previous life memories, but I mean, I certainly have heard that people can have these memories that they lived before they lived there, their family members, or I think Ian Stevenson was one of the early people gathering these stories, especially children. They would the first, especially when they were younger, they would remember their past lives that they were in this village or in these family members. So again, I mean, these things are one can gather stories, but we don't really know what happens or how that mechanism functions. But what we can observe is, that rebirth that is taking place here and now, the moment by moment by moment. What is it that continues? Are we the same people who walked into this room, or is it like this? Isn't I'm not sure if this how true this is, but one of the things I've heard is this body every 7 years, I think all the cells, all the materials they replace themselves the food we eat. And so around, I believe it's 7 years. So, is it this, it's a different set of materials, and yet it's this body, and that's me. And then same with the mind, that what is it that continues? So yeah, that's when we are not in bodies, and Yeah, so maybe when we are not in our bodies, maybe like there's many near death experiences that people might, there's a physical clinic. I don't remember the exact term, maybe clinically dead, so the like heart or brain, and then it doesn't function in the instruments, and then maybe they're revived after a few minutes. And then the experiences some people describe of going outside their body and seeing the body from outside, or going into various realms. One of this is Dr. Bruce Grayson. He's written a few books about these clinical experiences of people. But again, I mean, these are sort of anecdotal evidence. So again, what mechanism might operate behind that, again, I can't really say. I suppose something similar.
Well, yeah, what's the Buddhist vision of death? I think I think that a lot about that, but basically death is the death of the body in Buddhism, and there's all kinds of practices to also loosen the attachment to the body, so it becomes easier when you are at that point of death to really let go. Not the only reason, but Ajahn already explained quite a lot of that. Out of the body, there's or out or not into bodies. There is in the Buddhist text a term in Pali called Manamayakaya, and that's literally that means mind-made body, and that's one of the psychic powers also, that to be able to produce that Manamayakaya, so to literally step out of your body. Say in modern terms, you could think of it as like astral travel or something like that. The Buddhist texts don't actually make very much of these things, as in they don't really go too deeply into it, because on a number of occasions the Buddha has also mentioned that these kind of magical powers are not his real core teaching. What he wants to convey is basically go to the suffering and the end of suffering, and these things are sort of byproducts rather than they're not part of the goal. So whether you go to during nights or dreams, dreams basically. I actually want to leave that question to Ajahn Bodhisattva, who's done a little bit more, in the kind of talk a bit more about the Tibetan tradition also, I think, dream yoga. I think that might be interesting in that. And yeah, past life memories. I think Ajahn Santamana has covered that quite well. There's just a lot of stories out there that you can look up from either the books from Ian Stevenson or from lots of YouTube videos, people that are remember enough to be able to also show that or proof that this is actually something that happened to them, because they remember things that there's no way they could have known. And it's quite often children, again, before the age of 7, as Ian Stevenson has shown as well. And quite often children that in a previous life have died of violent death. There seems to be that the memories are much stronger in that case. I think I'll pass it on actually.
Well, maybe just a few comments here, like, it does seem like this question is looking into, some of the subjectivity aspect about it. Well, I'll just say a few incoherent things off the top. How about that? For starters, it's our sort of common or accepted contemporary paradigm that we're sort of materialistic. So we think that consciousness is in the body, for example, or the mind is in the body, something, but that's not just accepted at face value or through, majority rule in all cultures, and certainly not in all Buddhist cultures. And sort of the dream simile is an interesting one, and that it predates the more modern like simulation theory like that. But we can see when we go into a dream, we actually have all the functioning senses and then some. So it's clear that consciousness or mind consciousness or whatever can create like virtual worlds that for all practical purposes, we meet people we don't know. They seem to be independent beings. They say things to us that we don't feel like we invented, So, I mean, we want to keep an open possibility there. Also in the Buddhist text, they say that, sort of mind and matter co-arise, and you really don't get a hard distinction between them. So that opens up possibilities too, that just loosens a bit that distinction between being in a body or being out of a body. And some who do trend more towards subjectivity think of bodies as like being in consciousness, because that's the only way that we know them, actually. Just that we have all this sort of tangible evidence that seems to, feel otherwise, that consciousness is in bodies. But through meditation can definitely give the experience that bodies are in consciousness. Just seems to be much more the phenomenology that we experience. That's one thing. Also during night and dreams, I was just recollecting my dear preceptor today, Ajahn Liam, and I was writing him a letter in Thai. Anyway, I was just going to tell him that I do praise him and mention him in discussions often, and he does have this unique thing. They do call it yogic sleep, where you remain in awareness through sleep. And so he's been like that for over 30 years now. He's just aware all the time, and he can see the body and the mind sleeping. And this goes way, way back in all the yogic texts and all the kind of Buddhist and yogic traditions, although it is seen to be quite extraordinary, and not all kind of enlightened beings have that ability. But it does tend to give evidence for that there is a deeper kind of, for lack of a better word, it's just, for lack of a better word, let's just call it non-dual awareness then, or pure awareness, or they just call it the chitta. There's some deeper level here of knowing that's, beyond mental or prior to the mental. And, yogis, deep meditators can learn to recognize that and, carry that through deep sleep too. So that gives a little bit of a switch, a shift on this thing about being in or out of the body, or, leaving the body at night, or under anesthesia, or at death for that matter. So that's just another thing to consider, to keep an open mind there. About past life memories, well, yeah, it's all over the Asian cosmology and the Buddhist cosmology, and many of the Western paradigms too, like Ian Stevenson. They're beginning to accept it. So there does seem to be, when this question is asked in the early suttas, what is the kind of a continuity thing between lives? Is it a self? Is it a soul? Is there something continuous, or does it arise and pass away like a flame? We look at a flame and we say that's continuous, but it is a constant, like, it's not a static thing. It just looks that way. Or like if you look at a bubbler, water bubbler, and it looks like a a column of water, but it's a dynamic thing that's happening all the time. So often that's one framing to think about it. But also some of the, you know, these Buddhist or Asian cosmologies, they don't think about it like we go to different realms. It's more the different realms come to us. For what it's worth, that's what I heard, and that's what made more sense to me when I first came to the traditions. And again, you know, how friendly we are to it, there could be a kind of pure subjectivity that is impersonal. And it's a different person from life to life. But the continuity aspect is just some kind of the pure subjectivity. That's where it said you can sort of, karma could be stored. I mean, memory is a really wild, mysterious thing, and karma seems to be some kind of a memory thing. So later Buddhist traditions would try to invent schemes that would reconcile these apparent like paradoxes of discontinuity in time or at death, and how you're going to carry over something for, you know, like rebirth. But the Buddha does mention that karma, or, you know, karma and craving are the important ones to be linking up a reincarnation. And there is a special kind of consciousness, even the sort of rebirth linking consciousness, I forget the Pali name. But so, you know, there are schemes that try to explain that. And even if you go to like later Buddhism, like Tibetan, they have the phenomena of the tulku, where very advanced meditators, and this you have to keep in mind, the bodhisattva ideal, where you're actually, you know, you shift your enlightenment concern to all beings. And so you actually resolve to stay in the realm of existences in order to help beings get liberated, the bodhisattva ideal. And those meditation masters, they actually do include the death process in their meditation very deeply, and learn how to go into that realm of consciousness while still living, so that when death comes, they're able to control their passage through that level of consciousness and actually deliberately you know, intervene with their rebirth process. Actually, is this too spooky? Well, anyway, these are just very ordinary discussions that happen. They just include later Buddhism, so we might not be familiar if we're just coming from the Pali. But yeah, so they say those are abilities, and you can do all the tests, you know, to see if they will predict where they're going to be reborn in such and such a town to such and such parents, and then they go to that town and find that new child, and the child will have the memories and the recollections of the past practitioner. So there's really no, you know, it doesn't break any laws that it could be a legitimate thing. So yeah, so one could just keep in mind is, I know that sounds like there's a person being reborn, but there could be some things that we just don't understand yet. And I don't claim to understand them either, although I'm interested, and they definitely could make sense. Once you do discover that the world is a bit more, you know, wild and mysterious than the rational mind thought, you open up to possibilities. And so a lot of the Asian cosmology that sounded real wild and, you know, fantasy-like at first, you start to say, well, yeah, why not? You know, it could be. And also this thing about having the ordinary turn into something quite extraordinary. So that opens up a lot of possibilities. Okay, so yeah. Should I read this now?
Yes.
Yeah. Dear Venerable Ajahn Bodhisattva, isn't the flow of knowing the same as continuous sati sampajanya? Question number one. Question number two, in the context of elements, the Buddha also mentions the consciousness element. Indeed. Could you please explain how to practice the consciousness element? Indeed. In it, the name is practicing the knowing. Oh, is it the same as practicing the knowing? Or is it something different? Thank you. Okay, good questions here. The flow of knowing, yes, I mean, often sati sampajanya, there's a lot of more Pali terms we could be using that some of us might be more familiar with and are more specific. Sati Sampajanya could definitely be like a flow of knowing. We did mention knowing, it is going to have this sort of global awareness aspect to it. When we were using that term knowing, has a kind of a global awareness or aspect to it too. And there's ways one can develop that, like you learn how to see in your periphery, and then you start to become aware of everything like all at once without needing to use attention to focus on objects and recognize them. And Sati Sampajanya, when Sati does become continuous, I mean, this is where many, like especially the Thai forest practitioners, they're practicing continuity of Sati, mindfulness, and they get that instruction on day one, and all their teachers came that way. So they will actually practice deliberate, mindfulness with attention, just like all the standard ways, the things we read in the text, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And they'll get better and better at it till you get non-distracted mindfulness, and then it turns into a flow state of knowing. It kind of changes into a new thing, where before mindfulness used to be patchy and distractible. Now it's just like an ever-present knowing. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes they'll start to call that like awareness, just to show that it's a little bit different than mindfulness. Or when it is automatic, effortless, and undistractable, they'll call it like Mahasati, great mindfulness. So yeah, there's quite a range of knowings which will, develop for the, dedicated mindfulness practitioner. And Sampajanya, usually has some of the wisdom element to it, like contextualizing, like your situation. So rather than just being mindful of your breath and excluding everything else, Sampajanya, and there's some good commentarial distinctions. You'll know what you're doing, what your purpose for doing it is. If it's the suitable thing to be doing, you'll be aware of your meditation object, and you'll have metacognitive awareness about that it's not too tight, not too loose, or scattered inwardly or outwardly. All those kinds of things. Sati Sampajanya, especially related specifically to meditation. And it is definitely a flow state, And whether one thinks of it as mindfulness or attention or awareness, or in some modern presentations, they're really beginning to, sort of expand the mindfulness, the mindfulness trend, and to be a bit more nuanced and say you're actually developing these 2 faculties of attention and awareness, which are different parts of the brain, and to use them optimally together. And that's a good reference to Sati Sampajanya, or just like samadhi in general. Samadhi that's not just focused on one object, but samadhi that you're actually using to develop wisdom and other things. Okay, yeah, the 6 senses. The 5th one is space: earth, water, fire, air, space, and consciousness. That's the 6-fold elemental scheme. And the consciousness element, there's consciousness kasina too, where you actually use knowing or awareness as your samadhi meditation object. There's consciousness element, where you can be seeing it as an element, meaning it's a constituent of our experience. And you can use it a bit more for wisdom practice like that. And so, related to the other part of that question, is it the same as the knowing or practicing the knowing? There could be some more like subtle distinctions there about, there's also like the infinite consciousness, the formless samadhi. It's said to be the 6th attainment like that, where you're just taking boundless consciousness as your meditation object. And so they're all related, but they are different. And I haven't really thought too much about the distinctions with the different terms. But for example, if you are taking, consciousness or knowing as part of your wisdom theme, that might be more the consciousness element. or especially if you're like including an independent origination, seeing that there's consciousness and there's the eye and then there's hearing, things like that. So yeah. Knowing and awareness and mindfulness and attention, they all have subtle nuances, but they all sort of converge on, being present and aware to what one's experiencing, and then beginning to include more and more sort of wisdom in that. So I could just talk on and on.
That's a whole drama talk. I think you can.
Do you want to make some comments?
No, I think you did very well.
Something?
Oh. Yeah, maybe just I think one thing that came to mind, one retreat, it was Ajahn Sundar, one of the senior nuns at the monastery I was at, and the retreat with her, and she did a very useful exercise, because I was always, what is this awareness, or what, how does one look at it? So it was just like to keeping so unfocused gaze, and then having a gaze that's open. So one is not giving attention to any particular thing, and to just see how long can we maintain that. So that's the visual field, and then I suppose the instruction is to see if we can not focus on any particular thing, but to include the whole of the visual field. And then as one tries to do that, and you can do this just in the countryside, sitting on a bench or anywhere, and then you suddenly start to notice it as a movement, and there's a spike of attention that goes there or there, and also you become aware. It's like such the attention jumps so much, and presumably this is happening ordinarily as well, but we maybe don't tend to notice, and then how often the attention. So then that sense of awareness or knowing, to what extent can one stay with that awareness, that I suppose mirror-like quality that reflects whatever is put before it. So, like I might have mentioned before as well, if I'm sitting somewhere and has background sound and like a bird, then I don't need to consciously decide, oh, that is a bird. Something knows, or something recognizes. I suppose we're more tuning into that faculty, because it's something so close or so ordinary, we don't tend to notice it or give it much importance. If we start to look, it's something always there in the background. What is it? It's very strange. That's what came to mind with this question.
We just mentioned to a few other, it did this thing about like practicing with knowing or consciousness. I mean, usually we will give a lot of like discussion and topic to that. And there are just so many little tricks or pro tips, or like Ajahn Santa was mentioning, and often the space element does seem to be a gateway into consciousness. Like noticing how all the objects in this room are in space, and they're sort of made of space. In a similar way, it's very easy with visual consciousness, one can see that all the objects of visual consciousness are arising in our knowing of them. They're not separate from the knowing. So in some sense, our knowing is there. or that visual object is here, however you want to say it, but you just start to look for knowing everywhere. And you can get sort of like a figure ground reversal of, consciousness knowing an object arising in sort of the space of awareness, that kind of a thing. Also, there's another little trick they do where you hold your finger out here and you put your attention on it, and then you move your finger, but keep your attention where your finger was. And so you notice now you have your attention like in space, but there's nothing there. But there's the knowing of that space there. And so that can start to, give the sense of there is knowing everywhere. So the whole space is pervaded by knowing. And that's a bit of this distinction between using consciousness like as an insight or a wisdom practice. And my first teacher did that a lot, especially with visual consciousness. So did I. Or if you close your eyes and go inward to mental space, that's more like the fifth attainment of infinite consciousness, is where you're going into more mental space. So it can be a little bit different if you're doing visual space and visual consciousness or other senses like hearing, or if you're going just into the mind and the mental space and looking at mental consciousness. Usually taking eyes open consciousness practice is related to wisdom. In fact, Ajahn Chah used to say, wisdom arises on contact. We practice with our eyes open. So another thing that we haven't emphasized at all yet, but those who are doing insight practice, or especially regarding awareness, can try doing meditation with their eyes open. And there are, of course, later both Zen and Tibetan traditions that do that, or the Thai forest tradition, because for a wisdom tradition, they will be doing a lot of both samadhi and panya, wisdom, with the eyes open practice. Thank you for that add-on.
Actually, 2 minutes to 8.
Mm-hmm.
And we still have the 3 questions from the internet,
Mm-hmm.
and we have 1 more here with them.
If one of those was Jacob's, I answered it already.
I don't know who this is.
Okay, he said he posted one. Oh, okay. They don't say.
Okay, yeah, have a look online then.
Mhm.
Maybe we can do that tomorrow, after the Dhamma talk, then do the final questions. Is that an idea? And we'll just
I'll use the questions during the talk.
Yeah, I've you can have a look online and see what's there. Okay. It is beautiful to see teachers or respected people apologize. When you admit you are not perfect, then I do not have to be perfect, to pretend to be perfect either. I wish that if you put on a robe, you'd immediately perfect and enlightened. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And it also doesn't work to eat the relics, by the way. That's something that happened to us in Santi Forest Monastery.
Did you say eat the relics?
Yeah, somebody ate the Buddha relics.
Wow. Okay.
They did not become enlightened. They were sent away.
Wow. That's special.
We are just human, and everybody comes to monasticism or teacher or with your own baggage, and there's a lot of baggage that you might have worked through before you came to that point, but there's probably still quite a lot there, and you need to work through that. And one of the ways of doing that is becoming a monastic, is certain things are just a little bit easier to get through, because you tend to give a lot up, and you, for instance, don't use money. That's already become quite difficult to start, if you have a craving to start buying things that you want to have, for instance. So all these, that's just a simple example, but it's letting go of certain possibilities. I'm looking for a word here that I can't think of, but never mind. So no, we are definitely not perfect, and there's a lot to learn for all of us. Ajahn?
Yeah, I think Ajahn Mahabua is often in his talks, he would say, oh, just because you have taken on these ochre robes, ordination doesn't mean your defilements have also taken ordination. These forms, wearing these funny clothes. It's more to create those conditions that are supportive for practice. So unless one is enlightened, then there's all sorts of faults that the individuals might have and might do harmful action or say things that might not be helpful to people or even might harm them. So in a sense, that's there's that emphasis on sila or at least attempting to live in a harmless way. Or so many of the Vinaya rules are about how monastics shouldn't exploit sort of the faith of lay people and because I mean history of religions and religious movements, so many people like charismatic teachers maybe set themselves up and then exploit the faith that is put in them for their own benefit or etc. So certainly one needs to use one's discernment whenever one comes across spiritual teachers to see where are they coming from. I think one of the suttas it goes to a list of like the things to observe, and it's something like it's only after a long time that you can see if it's a person of integrity. And then you observe them, how they speak, what they do, etc. It's important to use one's, be careful and use one's discernment when with spiritual teachers, etc.
Yeah, just a few brief comments. It is true, though, monasticism, there are so many precepts, like in addition to the 5, many refined, more refined like conduct precepts and more refined speech. There's like 20 or 30 speech precepts. And there aren't so much like mind precepts, like you can't think this way, or, you break your vows or something because you can't really control the mind like that. But there are many ways in which just keeping, there's said to be like, there's like 200 or 300, for bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, and then there's supposed to be a few thousand more, like minor sort of precepts or etiquette and protocol. So there's just huge structure there. And if you are in a community that's, keeping pretty high bar, high standard precept conduct, and everyone's doing it, you do find that just through intending that way, you are changing your behaviors by body, speech, and mind. And so when like the unskillful or say bad habits, when they're not like happening or perpetuating, they do start to, they start to subside because they're not being strengthened by being perpetuated. And the stronger or the new habits are starting to be strengthened and become the new habits. So after a while, just virtuous conduct by virtue of keeping these precepts just becomes your norm.
Mhm.
And you really do change, of course, your actions, but also your speech and your mind, and developing all the loving kindness and everything, and everyone else is sort of united in the project to do likewise. So it is really true that that kind of structure can go a long, long way. And again, that's another virtue of intentional community or sangha. And also that kind of like next level integrating one's practice into all of one's sort of body, speech, and mind. So it's like, eightfold path, next level, where you're just really taking a whole bunch of more, guidelines or precepts on how to have the conduct be more in alignment with that. Yeah. Yeah, admitting you're not perfect. Different traditions do have different sort of archetypes of perfection. In the early scriptures, the Buddha is said to be vicha charana sampanno, impeccable in conduct and understanding. So they really do take an impeccability of conduct as a show of virtue or a demonstration of virtue. Although it doesn't ensure enlightenment. There are many who have good conduct, very good conduct, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're enlightened. But there are debates and disputes which happen when there's an assertion of enlightenment, but less than impeccable conduct. But there are just good to know, keep different interpretations of that this archetype of perfection and conduct perfection isn't a kind of a universally agreed upon thing. In fact, Ajahn Chah is like famous for saying, this very question here, if I were perfect, it would not be like true to what the spirit of the Dharma is not necessarily about attaining perfection like that. So the Thai forest teachers are very earthy, and they're often not like the epitome of the beautiful, sweet smelling enlightened saint kind of a thing. So that's usually good for us, just to see how much we're projecting or idealistic or have that perfectionist thing. So yeah, there's a lot there. But it is good. Most important is that we do see what inspires us and find role models that we can be inspired by and emulate. Teachers. Yeah.
Meditation.
So maybe before the meditation, just to mention like this intention to light the candles for all the suffering beings in the world, especially this particular time, which is so difficult. For myself, especially the current genocide happening in Palestine, but also other wars across the world, in Sudan, the Congo, as Ukraine, there's many atrocities are happening. So just I thought to offer a general meditation on compassion, and maybe I see what happens when maybe mentioning some of these atrocities, but a general meditation on compassion, and then if you like to join with lighting the candle, just wishing this suffering to end as soon as possible, and the people affected for their well-wishing. Yeah. Yeah, and also like the phenomena of say mental health crisis, or hundreds of thousands of people dying from drug overdoses, and either some medical or otherwise, or and these various suicides as well, various difficult suffering that exists in the world. Just noticing the breathing in and breathing out. Noticing this being here, ourselves, generating the intention, may this being here not experience suffering. If we reflect on our own life here and now, we are in circumstances that are fairly safe. We do not immediately have to fear circumstances where we could lose our lives. If we look at the world, many places experiencing war, conflict, as hunger, deliberately created hunger, famine, and so much suffering. Can we generate an intention for the ending of that suffering as soon as possible? Breathing in, wishing well for oneself, wishing oneself freedom from suffering, and breathing out, sending that intention to the world, especially at this very difficult time. One can generate a mental intention for these sufferings to end, but one can also contemplate the actions one can do in order to contribute to the ending of these sufferings. Maybe it is just a very small action. Maybe it might not have an immediate concrete effect in the world. But just reflecting, are there things one can do or say or talk with people to make them consider how is it that we should live in this world. So here and now, breathing in, having compassion for oneself, then breathing out, generating the mental intention, spread that compassion to all beings, especially beings subject to genocide, to war, to conflict, to despair. May they be safe, may they be well. Then for the future, reflecting, are there things we can do ourselves to learn more about these conflicts, learn the historical conditions by which they have arisen, not just the superficial news reports. First of all, learning for oneself. Then maybe if one feels inclined to try and talk with others, to raise awareness. Breathing in here and now, having compassion for oneself, then breathing out, spreading it to the whole of the world, include all sentient beings in whatever form they may be living, in whatever circumstance they find themselves in. May they be safe, may they be well. May the circumstances bringing about suffering, death, may they come to an end as soon as possible. And for the future, reflecting for ourselves, are there ways of thinking that we hold, or prejudices that we hold, especially against the people being killed, that enables us to contribute to that suffering, examining how we view the world, how we think about the world, and to consider are there ways that we may think that contributes to harm in the world, and seeing if it is possible to change those ways of thinking. Here now, breathing in, having compassion for oneself, wishing oneself freedom from suffering, then breathing out, spreading it to others, until one includes all sentient beings. And finally, if you like, sharing the merit of this practice. If there has been any benefit from having done this, may it also be of benefit to all sentient beings. May all beings be free from all suffering. May all beings incline towards Nibbana.
Okay. Arahang sama sambuddho bhagava Buddhang bhagavanta marivade Vagato bhagavata dhammo dhamma namasami Supatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho sangham namam